no digital trace. In a secret underground facility, uranium centrifuges spun out of control and shattered. Yet every control panel showed normal operations. The year was 2010. The target was Iran's Natanz enrichment plant. The weapon was not a bomb, but a computer virus called Stuxnet. It was the world's first cyberweapon to cause physical destruction. Roughly 1,000 machines were destroyed, all while their operators watched screens that told them everything was fine. Before the invisible worm burrowed into its circuits, Natanz was already the most heavily guarded scientific puzzle on Earth. Iran had chosen uranium enrichment as its path to nuclear capability, and the centerpiece of that effort sat roughly 300 kilometers south of Tehran, a sprawling, sand-colored complex buried partially underground, shielded by layers of concrete, blast doors, and anti-aircraft batteries. The logic was simple. If you control the fuel cycle, you control your destiny. At the heart of the facility, thousands of IR-1 centrifuges were arranged in long cascading chains. These were not advanced machines. They were based on a 1970s Dutch design, acquired through the black market network of A.Q. Khan, a Pakistani scientist who sold nuclear secrets to rogue states. The IR-1 was notoriously fragile. Its rotor spun at supersonic speeds, over 60,000 revolutions per minute, suspended on a thin magnetic bearing inside a vacuum chamber. One small vibration, one fluctuation in pressure or temperature, and the machine could tear itself apart in seconds. The international community watched this build-up with growing alarm. Diplomacy dragged on for years. Sanctions tightened. Covert efforts to sabotage procurement chains had some effect, but the centrifuges kept multiplying. By 2007, Iran had roughly 3,000 machines installed, with plans for 50,000 more. A traditional military strike was discussed repeatedly, and repeatedly dismissed. The facility was too hardened, the political fallout too unpredictable. Open conflict would plunge the region into chaos. So the puzzle remained. How do you stop a program hidden inside a fortress, without firing a single missile, without leaving a single fingerprint? The answer, when it came, was unlike anything in the history of warfare. But in a nondescript office, an entirely different kind of plan was taking shape. It was a radical, almost heretical idea. Instead of sending a jet or a commando team, you would send a string of ones and zeros. Instead of a bomb, you would use a line of code. The target was not the facility's walls, but the very logic inside the spinning centrifuges. This was the core concept of Operation Olympic Games, to cause physical destruction from the inside, using nothing but software. It offered something traditional military strikes could not: plausible deniability. If it worked, no one could definitively point a finger. There would be no crater, no bomb fragments, no clear act of war. It could delay Iran's program without triggering a wider regional conflict. The weapon would be invisible, its effects disguised as mechanical failure. This was not about stealing secrets, it was about bending physics to breaking point through deception. The goal was to make 1,000 precision machines tear themselves apart, all while reporting back to their human operators that everything was perfectly fine. It was a silent, digital siege. Behind the code was an unprecedented partnership. For the first time, two nations fused their top-tier cyber capabilities into a single strike force. The United States National Security Agency and Israel's Unit 8200 joined hands under a classified umbrella called Operation Olympic Games. Their shared target lay buried deep in the desert, the Siemens S7-300 programmable logic controllers governing Iran's uranium enrichment cascades at Natanz. These Siemens controllers were the brainstem of each centrifuge. They regulated valve pressures, monitored rotor speeds, and relayed a stream of sensor data to the main control room. The Alliance's goal was not to just infect computers. It was to hijack these industrial controllers and force them to command physical destruction. NSA brought its unmatched expertise in zero-day exploits and reverse engineering Windows-based engineering software. Unit 8200 delivered something equally critical: precise technical data on the IR-1 centrifuge architecture, the specific logic ladder diagrams loaded onto the S7-300 modules, and intelligence on exactly how the enrichment hall was air-gapped from the outside world. At American sites like the Idaho National Laboratory, teams reconstructed the Natanz cascade environment. They procured actual Siemens hardware and even surplus IR-1 rotors through black market intermediaries. Engineers then spent months crafting a malicious payload that could alter the S7-300's output frequencies. The code would speak flawless Modbus protocol to the local HMIs, all while subtly manipulating centrifuge drive speeds, pushing rotors into destructive resonance, then masking the event as a false mechanical error. The digital siege now had a concrete weapon, purpose-built by two nations operating in complete darkness. But to breach that fortified digital island, the attackers needed an unprecedented tool. They built Stuxnet as a multi-component worm, a digital Swiss Army knife designed for a single surgical strike. At its core were 4 zero-day exploits. These were vulnerabilities in Windows software that Microsoft and therefore the world knew nothing about. Possessing just one is a powerful asset for any intelligence agency. Stuxnet weaponized 4, making it almost impossible to defend against at the time. These exploits formed the delivery system. 1. Targeting a flaw in how Windows handled shortcut files allowed the worm to spread via USB drives, the perfect vector for an air-gapped network. Another, in the Windows print spooler, let it move laterally between computers. Once inside, Stuxnet deployed a sophisticated rootkit to hide its files and processes, making it invisible to system administrators and antivirus software. This was not a crude tool, it was a modular, precision instrument. Its design was exclusively tailored for the Siemens Step 7 software and the specific programmable logic controllers, or PLCs, at Natanz. The worm would search tirelessly for the exact configuration of centrifuges in the Iranian cascade. If it didn't find its target, it would lie dormant and continue spreading, but when it did, it would load its true payload, a set of malicious code designed not to steal, but to sabotage. The weapon was now inside the fortress, and it was ready to execute its singular destructive purpose. But a digital weapon still needed a physical carrier to reach its target. Natanz was air-gapped. Its control systems had no connection to the outside internet. That wall of isolation was considered impenetrable. The attackers knew they could not hack their way in. They had to walk it through the front gate. The answer was simple, low-tech, and devastatingly effective: USB flash drives. The worm was engineered with a propagation module that lay dormant on infected machines connected to the internet, waiting for a removable drive to be inserted. Once it detected a USB stick, Stuxnet copied itself silently, hiding inside the drive's firmware. The user would see nothing unusual. The trap was now mobile. The real challenge was getting those infected drives into the hands of people with access to the inner sanctum. Intelligence agencies turned to unwitting intermediaries, contractors, technicians, and scientists who moved between the outside world and the sealed enrichment halls. Some drives were planted at companies that serviced the facility. Others were handed out at technical conferences or left in parking lots, relying on human curiosity. In most cases, the carriers had no idea they were delivering a cyber bomb. When one of those tainted USB sticks was finally plugged into a machine inside the isolated network, the worm crossed the air gap in milliseconds. It scanned the system, identified its environment, and began to spread laterally, searching for its specific prey. The physical boundary that had protected Natanz for years had just been breached by a piece of plastic the size of a thumb. The weapon was no longer outside the fortress. It was already inside the centrifuge's nervous system. The attack unfolded inside the vast underground halls of the Natanz enrichment complex. Stuxnet had infected the Siemens S7-300 controllers that governed the IR-1 centrifuges. These machines normally spun at a steady 63,000 revolutions per minute. The worm altered the frequency output to 1064 Hz, pushing the rotor speed dangerously high. Then after a set interval, it commanded a rapid deceleration to just 2 Hz. This extreme fluctuation, from supersonic to near standstill, occurred in cycles lasting roughly 15 to 50 minutes. The aluminum bellows and rotor assemblies experienced intense harmonic vibration, far exceeding their fatigue limits. The stress created hairline cracks in the thin-walled tubes. Eventually the rotors burst, sending shrapnel through the cascade. Yet the Iranian operators monitoring the process saw only tranquility. Stuxnet performed a masterful digital deception. Before initiating the speed changes, it captured a 21-second snapshot of normal sensor readings from the centrifuges, vibration, pressure, and temperature values all within safe ranges. It then fed this recording to the control system on an endless loop, overriding the actual sensor data. The Siemens WinCC supervisory software displayed stable, routine operation. No alarms sounded. No emergency shutdowns triggered. The engineers replaced the shattered units, often with centrifuges that had been previously compromised. The sabotage deepened. The weapon was not just inside the machine, it was inside the perception of the machine, and the humans trusted the screen. At Natanz, the centrifuges were arranged in cascades of 164, spinning at supersonic speeds to separate uranium isotopes. The virus began its assault in waves, carefully spaced to evade detection. First, it quietly mapped the system. Then, it recorded normal operating parameters and played them back on a loop to the control room, hiding any sign of tampering. The actual attack was brutal. Stuxnet targeted the frequency converters made by a specific Finnish manufacturer, Vacon, and an Iranian firm, Ferraro Paya. It periodically increased the rotor speed far beyond safe limits, then slammed them down to near stall speeds. This induced extreme vibrations and stress fractures in the thin aluminum rotor tubes. Rotors expanded in their casings, scraped against the walls, and shattered. Each failure spewed uranium hexafluoride gas inside the sealed cascade halls, contaminating the other machines. Between late 2007 and early 2010, roughly 1,000 IR-1 centrifuges were destroyed in this manner. The attacks came in distinct pulses, each lasting a few months, then pausing for months to let Iranian engineers reset the cascades with fresh centrifuges. The operators, seeing normal readings on their screens, never understood why the new machines kept failing so quickly. They frantically replaced the broken units, drawing down their limited stockpile of spares. Enrichment operations stalled repeatedly. The IR-1 was already a notoriously fragile design, prone to frequent breakdowns. The virus simply amplified its inherent weaknesses, turning a routine maintenance headache into a silent catastrophe. Iran's nuclear timeline slipped backward, month by month, without a single explosion. Inside the Natanz enrichment complex, the cascading failures seem to have a simple explanation. Centrifuges are delicate machines, spinning at supersonic speeds. When they break, the first suspects are always the same: manufacturing defects, operator error, or contaminated feedstock. Iranian engineers and nuclear officials saw no reason to think otherwise. They blamed faulty batches of rotors and bearings, sourcing problems from their black market suppliers. They suspected that Western sanctions had forced them to rely on substandard parts. Over time, the breakdowns became a routine part of the operation. Technicians grew accustomed to the sound of alarms and the constant replacement of IR-1 centrifuges. But the machines were not simply failing, they were being systematically destroyed by invisible code. The virus was busy altering valve positions and rotor speeds, pushing centrifuges past their physical limits while reporting normal conditions to the control room. The operators saw nothing. They believed they were managing a series of isolated incidents. In reality, roughly 1,000 centrifuges were taken out of commission over a period of 18 to 24 months. The enrichment output at Natanz plummeted, and the number of operational cascades was cut nearly in half. Iran's nuclear clock was not just paused, it was rewound. The program lost an estimated 2 years of progress, and nobody in Tehran suspected a cyberweapon. They kept searching for mechanical ghosts, entirely blind to the digital war being waged inside their own walls. In June 2010, a small antivirus company in Minsk, Belarus, began investigating a computer in Iran that was caught in a reboot loop. The firm, Virus Block Ada, extracted a suspicious driver file from the machine. It was digitally signed with a valid certificate belonging to a Taiwanese hardware manufacturer. That signature should not have been there. The file turned out to be a zero-day exploit targeting Windows systems. The malware used this foothold to hunt for a very specific kind of software, Siemens Step 7, the nervous system of industrial control units. Within days, the worm appeared on machines across Europe, India, and Indonesia. Its code was dense, layered, and unusually large, roughly half a megabyte of instructions. Analysts found 4 different zero-day attacks and a complex propagation method that included infected USB drives. The true target remained hidden until researchers uncovered references to frequency converters made by 2 Iranian firms. The worm would silently alter rotor speeds on centrifuges while feeding false data back to the monitoring screens. The digital ghost that haunted Natanz had leaked into civilian networks. Once the antivirus community began dissecting it, the operation was no longer invisible. The code had escaped the sealed rooms and was now under a global microscope. What researchers found inside the code rewrote the rules of digital forensics. It was not a typical worm built for theft or spam. This was a precision weapon. 4 zero-day exploits were woven together, an unprecedented arsenal. Each vulnerability was worth millions on the black market, yet here they were, used in a single operation. The code carried stolen digital certificates from 2 legitimate companies, Realtek and J Micron, both based in the same Taiwanese industrial park. Such theft required physical access or deep supply chain infiltration. The payload revealed its target with surgical clarity. It searched for a very specific configuration: Siemens S7-300 controllers paired with frequency converters from either Vacon in Finland or Ferraro Paya in Iran. These converters spun the gas centrifuges at Natanz. The malware only activated if exactly 984 machines were connected, matching the cascade layout inside the enrichment halls. If that number did not match, it stayed silent. Once active, it overrode the safety valves and slowly overpressurized the rotors while feeding fake normal readings to the control room. The attack cycled between spinning the machines too fast and too slow, degrading aluminum tubes until they shattered. The development cost was estimated at roughly $100 million. The team behind it included experts in Windows exploits, PLC engineering, and nuclear physics. Evidence pointed to a state with deep intelligence on Natanz's floor plans and centrifuge acoustics. The digital fingerprints, the 0 days, the stolen certs, the specific target profiles left an unmistakable trail. The sheer scale and sophistication made attribution inevitable. Analysts concluded this was a joint project by the United States and Israel. The code spoke louder than any press release ever could. What Stuxnet achieved was unprecedented. A software program, a string of ones and zeros, had traveled across air-gapped networks and physically destroyed machinery inside a highly secure facility. In roughly 18 months, it ruined around 1,000 IR-1 centrifuges spinning in the desert at Natanz. Before this moment, cyber attacks stole data, defaced websites, or caused brief outages. Now, code had become a kinetic weapon. The line between a digital breach and a bombing run had been erased. International law had no clear framework for this new reality. The traditional rules of armed conflict covered bullets and bombs, not lines of malicious code that could disguise themselves as legitimate industrial software. Legal scholars began debating a profound question: was this an act of sabotage, or was it an act of war? The attack also left the weapon's blueprints scattered across the digital underworld. Once Stuxnet escaped the custody of the developers and infected computers worldwide, its advanced techniques became a public library for hackers and nation-states alike. The creation of this weapon effectively sparked a global cyber arms race. Countless governments moved offensive cyber capabilities from fringe theory to top strategic priority. A new Rubicon had been crossed, and the world watched as the architects of a silent war retreated, leaving everyone else to grapple with the monster they had unleashed from the deep. The Natanz centrifuges fell silent for a time, but not forever. The destruction of roughly 1,000 IR-1 machines was a brutal wound, yet Iran treated it as a harsh classroom. Rather than abandon the program, they absorbed the lesson and rebuilt. Within months, new centrifuges were spinning, and by 2012, the enrichment hall held more advanced models, IR-2M, IR-4, that spun faster and more efficiently. The temporary delay of 18 months to 2 years simply compressed a timeline of ambition. By 2013, Iran's installed centrifuge count had surged from roughly 8,000 to over 19,000. The physical damage was real, but the strategic setback proved an illusion. The true cost rippled outward. Stuxnet's code escaped the Natanz digital air gap and scattered across the internet. Security researchers dismantled it, publishing its inner workings, and the zero-day exploits, PLC rootkits, and stolen digital certificates became a free arsenal. Copycat frameworks bloomed: Duke, Flame, Shamoon. In 2012, a variant struck Saudi Aramco, erasing data on 35,000 computers. The weapon's offspring did not discriminate. Cybercriminal gangs and a dozen nation-states repurposed the logic, and an arms race ignited on soil the creators could not control. Iran, meanwhile, took its own lesson in cyber offense. It invested heavily, and within a few years its own operatives launched retaliatory strikes on Gulf energy firms, U.S. banks, and a small dam in New York. The blowback from Operation Olympic Games seeded a cycle of escalation that no treaty could cage. The monster did not retreat to the deep, it multiplied. The Natanz facility stands today enriched by fivefold, operating IR-6 centrifuges under international camera, while Iran's nuclear know-how remains indelible. Stuxnet demonstrated that code could break steel, but it could not break will. The world's first cyber war sabotage won a battle, yet the war it unleashed now rages inside